Sure the vehicle's not leaning to one side or the other. That could indicate that we either have a low tire or we have a suspension problem. As I'm walking up, I'm looking at my clearance lights, make sure they're not cracked, damaged, not full of water. I'm making sure that our activity bus sticker is there. Checking my windshield, make sure there's no chips, cracks, and that the seal going around it is in good condition so that our windshield doesn't just fall out. I'm going to check the mirrors, make sure that they're tight, secured. Mirrors themselves aren't damaged beyond usage for the secure vision. Both sides. Check the wiring. All of our mirrors are heated mirrors, so we're gonna check the wiring on each one of these to make sure it's not cut, frayed, no bare wires, no sparking. Check my headlights, make sure they're not cracked, damaged, not full of water. Check my radiators inside to make sure that there's not damaged, they're not leaking, and any accessible hoses that I can get to. Make sure that they're not dry rotted, there's no cuts, gashes, not leaking, clamps are in place. Check my bumper. 4 mounting bolts here, make sure that they are all tight, they're not damaged. Open the hood. Like I said, use the handle, try to let it down gently so that we don't crack the mirror mounts on it. Starting on this side, check my intake box or air filter box, make sure it's securely mounted, and I'll check my vacuum gauge to make sure that the stopper isn't showing that it needs a new air filter. I'm going to check my computer, make sure it's mounted securely. Any wires coming off of it are in good shape. They're not frayed, not broken, no signs of arcing. There's no bare wires in there. And I'm also going to check any accessible wires on the way as I go through for the same thing. I'm going to check my hoses. These here are heater hoses. This is what provides your radiator fluid to all your heaters inside the bus. I want to make sure those aren't leaking, they're not dry rotted, clamps are in place, no cuts, no gashes. I'm going to check my alternator, make sure it's securely mounted. I'm going to check the cables coming off of it, make sure that they're not, there's no bare wires, no cuts, no frays, no signs of arcing. I'm going to check the inside, which is your rotor of your alternator, and make sure that there's no black marks in there indicating that we've had any arcing on the inside of it. While I'm here, I'm going to check my belt, make sure I don't have more than a 1/2 inch of play. Anything more than that would tell me that my belt tensioner, which is right here, is starting to wear out. I'll check my water pump while I'm down here just to make sure it's not leaking. Doesn't show any signs of leaking. And I'm going to check my fan blades to make sure that they spin properly and that the fan blades aren't cracked, broken, and needing repair. This also allows me to check to make sure it's not making contact with the fan shroud. I'm going to check inside the fan shroud, make sure I don't have any debris on the inside of that. That would keep the vehicle from cooling properly. I'm going to check my brain part at this point. No, it's not equipment arm. Shock absorber. I'm going to check my shock absorber, make sure it's not bent, damaged, it's not leaking, but I'm also going to make sure that I'm checking my shock absorber mount, make sure it's not damaged, cracked, broken, and that it is mounted securely. I'm going to check my U-bolts. I've got 4 nuts on the underside of that. I'd make sure that those nuts are secure and that bolts aren't damaged, cracked, broken. I'm going to check my leaf springs, make sure they're not cracked, broken, there's no illegal welds on them. My leaf spring shackles, I have one in the front and one in the rear back there. I'm going to make sure those are securely mounted. I'm going to check my axle, make sure it's not bent, damaged, that there's not no illegal welds on it. I'm going to check my tie bar or tie rod. That's what ties our tires together, keeps them turning the same direction. We want to make sure it's not bent, damaged, broken, and that there's no illegal welds on it. I'm going to check my brake line, starting down at the caliper. Make sure it's not dry rotted, there's no cuts, gashes, it's not leaking. I'm going to check it all the way up to the frame because that's as far as it'll go. That way you can see. Now I'm going to check my ABS line, that's the smaller line. I'm going to check it starting down at the wheel, make sure there's no cuts, gashes, no dry rotting, and it's not leaking. And I'm gonna check it as far as I can actually see it. It goes around, up around the bumper. I'm gonna check my brake caliper, make sure it's securely mounted. I'm also gonna check it from top and bottom for leaks. My steering knuckle, I'm going to check the insides around it just to make sure that there's no fresh oil. That would indicate that my wheel hub's leaking oil. My windshield wiper fluid reservoir, make sure it's securely mounted. It's not cracked, damaged, broken. It's not leaking fluid. I'm going to check the hose coming off of it. Make sure it's not dry rotted, no cuts, no gashes, not leaking. Check the wires coming off of it. Not cut, frayed, broken wires, no bare wires, no signs of arcing. On this side, we'll check the windshield wiper blades, make sure that they are flush up against the windshield, that my arms are in good condition, they're not broke, not bent, not damaged. What I can see of my windshield wiper blades. Check to make sure that they are in good condition, not dry rotted, not needing replacement. I'm going to check my brake fluid reservoir, make sure it's mounted securely, it's not cracked, damaged, it's not leaking, it's properly serviced between minimum and max, lids on tight, all the hoses coming off of it are in good condition, they're not dry rotted, there's no cuts, no gashes, it's not leaking, and that my clamps are in place and tight. I'm going to check the wires coming off of it, make sure there's no cuts, frays, bare wires, or signs of arcing. I have heater hoses down here. This goes to the driver's heater. I want to check it, make sure there's no cuts, gashes, no dry rotting, and it's not leaking. Clamps are in place and secure. I'm going to check my fuel filter assembly. I'm going to check the caps on it to make sure that the caps aren't leaking or show signs of leaking. I'm going to check down here at my fuel water separator, make sure that it's not leaking as well, and then it's closed. I'm going to check all the hoses coming off and around it, make sure that they're not dry rotted, there's no cuts, no gashes, it's not leaking, clamps are in place. Before the first start of the day, I would check my engine oil, pull the dipstick out, wipe it down, pull it all the way out. Wipe it off and then reinsert it and then pull it back out again. Make sure that we are properly serviced for engine oil. Looks like it may actually need to be checked for grills. Well, the engine's been running for a while, so I check one. It's called transmission fluid. We can check anytime, hot or cold. Pull it out. Wipe it off with a rag, put it back in, and pull it out again. And if you look at it, there's a hot and cold. If the engine or if it's been running, you check it over at the hot side. If it's before the first start of the day, you check it at the cold. Make sure that we're properly serviced. Check my engine oil fuel cap, make sure it's on tight. Check the hose going off of it, make sure that it's not dry rotted, there's no cuts, no gashes, and it's not leaking. Clamps are in place. I'm going to check my radiator fluid reservoir, make sure it's securely mounted. It's not damaged, there's no cracks, no holes in it, it's not leaking fluid. Check the hoses coming off of it for dry rot, cuts, gashes, leaks. Make sure my clamps are securely in place. Checking all the wires coming off of it. Make sure that they're not frayed, not damaged, not broken, not bare. There's no signs of arcing, along with any other wires that are in the area as well for the same thing. You have your wire connectors. This is for your the body of the bus. We want to make sure that there's none of them broken, cut, damaged, bare, no signs of arcing. We want to make sure that there's no corrosion buildup on them. And this down here is an anti-corrosive to make sure that our grounds don't corrode. Moving down, we'll check our steering link. We want to check the upper and lower universal links to make sure they're not damaged, that they're actually in place where they're supposed to be, and they're not dry. We check our steering gearbox, make sure it's securely mounted, that it's not leaking any fluid. We're going to check the hoses coming off of it. Cuts, gashes, signs of leaking, and dry rotting. This is our return, this is our pressure. We're going to look at the pitman arm, make sure it's securely mounted. We have a castellated nut and cotter pin down here connecting. We want to make sure that's there. Our drag link, we want to check, make sure that it is properly mounted. It's not bent, damaged, cracked, or broken. It is mounted with a castellated nut and cotter pin on both ends. We want to make sure those are in place and secure. Our power steering fluid reservoir, we want to make sure that it's securely mounted. It's not cracked, damaged, broken. It's not leaking. The cap is on tight, and it's serviced properly between minimum and maximum. We'll check our shock absorbers on this side and make sure they're not damaged, bent, broken, not leaking, and our shock absorber mounts to make sure that they're not bent, broken, cracked. Leaf springs, we want to check our U-bolts down here and make sure that the 4 mounting nuts on the bottom are secure, that they're not damaged, cracked, or broken. The leaf springs, we want to make sure they're not cracked, broken, there's no illegal welds on them. And we want to check our leaf spring shackles, make sure they are securely mounted, not damaged, not cracked, or broken. Coming down from our drag link, we have our steering arm. We want to make sure that that we have that castellated nut and cotter pin, both sides. We want to check our brake hose or brake line, make sure that it's not dry rotted, no cuts, no gashes, it's not leaking. We'll check it all the way down to the caliper, down to the frame. Our ABS line is right here. We'll check it starting at the wheel for the same thing. Cuts, gashes, dry rotting, leaking. And we'll check it as far back as we can, which goes up underneath the cab of the bus. While we're here, we're going to go ahead and check our brake calipers, make sure they're securely mounted, they're not leaking. And again, we're going to check around our steering knuckle to make sure there's not any fresh dark oil on there that would indicate that we have an axle hub leaking. We'll check our tires for 30 seconds, minimum tire wear. We want to make sure that it's even wear and that we don't have any major cuts or gashes in either the sidewall or the top. Sidewall, we also want to check for those cuts and gashes, but we also want to check for any bubbles or bulges. Our wheels, we're going to check to make sure that there's no cracks, major damage, heavy corrosion, and that there's no illegal welds on it. We'll check our valve stem, make sure it's not bent or broken, it's not leaking. Our lug nuts, we want to make sure that they are secure. There's no corrosion ring indicating that they're backing off. Our oil hub down here, we want to check to make sure that all of our hardware are tight, secure, and that it's not leaking around the bottom. On the inside of your inspection holes, you're going to check your discs on the inside to make sure that they are dry, that we don't have any metal shavings, no oil or grease on the rotors themselves, and that it's smooth. Our brake pads would check those, and the minimum wear on that is 1/4 of an inch. Moving back, we'll check our left turn signal, make sure that it's securely mounted, it's not cracked, damaged, it's not full of water. That is our engine compartment. Yeah.
You didn't mention anything about gear driven or belt driven.
It's just the power steering pump is gear driven, everything else is belt
Yes.
driven, right? What do we need to mention of those?
Because of the fact that it is gear driven, you do want to point out that your power steering pump is gear driven. It's mounted on the back side of the engine, right hand side, just to the right of the oil pan. It's silver in color.
Everything else is...
We're inspecting that to make sure it's not leaking.
So the alternators or generator, whichever is belt driven, all the other pumps are belt driven.
The only thing you have to specifically point out is the power steering pump. Because it is gear driven.
He said he wanted to know each one, that we had to say whether it was belt or gear driven. But I don't know
Not
which
a
one is
norm,
what
but-
pumps.
All right, that's not a
Maybe
norm.
if you just say
but
all the pumps besides the power steering are.
really it is. Your alternator, Alternator is the only thing that's belt driven on this thing because we don't have air conditioning or anything else.
Okay.
Your power steering pump is gear driven off the back of the engine, and that's the only thing these engines really have on them outside of what you need for your
So
overhead
the alternator's
valves.
belt driven, the power steering is gear driven.
And it's mounted behind the engine to the right of the oil pan.
Obviously, your water pump's belt driven off of it.
Okay.
Now you got me thinking.
All right, 15 minutes to do the whole engine.